Good evening. Everyone, if you can... Okay, thank you. Good evening. We are rapidly approaching the end of our first day. And I hope you consider, I hope you find this first day closure a closure with a golden key. I don't know if this expression means something in English, but I hope so. It does? Okay. So, I'm Kitty Furtado, and I'm an academic and an anti-racist activist. I work mainly on black gay cinema in Portugal at the University of Minho. And I'm here to moderate this conversation between Ruth Wilson Gilmore and Dima Mohammed. I will briefly present both of them. Ruth Wilson Gilmore, who is a professor of Earth and Environmental Sciences, American Studies, and Africana Studies at the University of New York Graduate Center, where she served as director of the Center of Place, Culture, and Politics from 2014 to 2024. Co-founder of many grassroots organizations, including California Prison Moratorium Project, Critical Resistance, and Central California Environmental Justice Network, Gilmore is author of Abolition Geography, Essays Towards Liberation, and Golden Gulag, Prison Surplus, Crisis and Opposition in Globalizing California. Together with Paul Gilroy, she co-edited Stuart Hall's selected writings on race and difference. Other recent publications include An Introduction to Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, Imperialism and the National Question, and Forewords to Bobby M. Wilson's Birmingham classic, America's Johannesburg, to Cedric J. Robinson on Racial Capitalism, Black Internationalism, and Cultures of Resistance, to the English translation of Making the World Clean by François Verger, and to Titi Bhattacharya and Susan Ferguson Ed's Making Death and Life in Palestine. Ruth Wilson Gilmore has lectured around the world. The Antipode, the commentary, Racial Capitalism with Ruth Wilson Gilmore, directed by Kenton Card in 2021, is a glimpse into her internationalist work. You can see this film at YouTube, and I urge you to do it. Honors given to Gilmore include the Association of American Geographers Lifetime Achievement Award in 2020, the 2020 Lannan Foundation Lifetime Cultural Freedom Prize with Mike Davis and Angela Davis, and the 2022 Margaret Casey Freedom Scholar Prize. She is a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Thank you, Ruth, for being here with us today. And with us is also Dima Mohamed, who has a PhD in humanities from the University of Amsterdam, and is a principal researcher in philosophy and professor of communication at Nova School of Social Sciences and Humanities at Nova University of Lisbon. Dima's main academic expertise is in argumentation theory at the intersection of philosophy and communication. Her research examines the complexities of public political arguments and the challenges they pose. with a focus on workings of argumentation and challenging conditions, such as situations characterized by populism, hate speech, polarization, deep disagreements, and epistemic injustice. Over the years, Dima has studied argumentative practices in a diversity of contexts. Formal institutional ones, such as parliaments, UK, EU, and Portugal, and presidential speeches, USA, as well as less formal ones, such as social media discussions, for instance, Arab Spring, terrorism, #MeToo, the 2022 Ukraine war, and the global protest for Palestine. Beyond research, she has also taught argumentation, rhetoric, and persuasion, communication and media, as well as critical thinking in universities in Portugal, the Netherlands, Switzerland, Canada, and Palestine. Beyond the university, Dima is an active member of several culture collectives and initiatives, including Frames of Palestine and Palestina em Português, as well as founding member of PUSH, a platform for Portuguese civil society collectives built to promote solidarity with Palestine. She intervenes in public debates, cultural initiatives, and teachings with commitment to advancing the emancipatory potential of argument in public life and struggles for justice, equality, and decolonization. Thank you, Dima, for accepting the invitation. And for being here. And I think I will start this conversation exactly thinking about Palestine. I think that we can all agree that colonialism functions as a binary production machine by creating and imposing rigid hierarchies based on opposing categories such as us and them, civilized and savage, and by classifying and exploiting people based on notions such as race and gender. This allowed for economic exploitation through the specialization of colonial production and the subordination of racial groups to specific jobs, and social and cultural domination through the imposition of binary gender patterns, such as male and female, which exist to justify hierarchies and control populations. We would like to hear from you about this, how this machine works in the specific case of Palestine.
Thank you, Kitty. It's a great pleasure to be here today to speak to you, to speak in a Marxist Feminist Conference, and to speak about Palestine, despite everything. So, I don't know where to look now, Kitty, I need to... I'll try to look there, but, you know, I'm talking to you. So thinking of Palestine, I think to understand the Zionist colonial domination in Palestine, it's important to look at many things, but what I want to focus on today, which I think is something that has been bothering me a lot lately, and I'm sure it's something that you will connect to. Dehumanization, the pipelines of colonial dehumanization that runs through the Zionist colonial architecture structure. And I want to give it a name. It's a work in progress. So for now, I want to call that machinery of dehumanization the factories of unseeing. So these factories, despite the fact that I'm normally working within the framework of public arguments and narrative and language, it's not just in narrative and the media. And that's something that I want to make. That's mainly the point maybe I want to make today, that this factory of unseeing is embedded in the material and institutional architecture of domination, in border regimes, military doctrines, but also in donor policy and infrastructure, in NGOs, courts, universities, press, digital platforms, which all together shape both how Palestinians live, that's the material condition part, and how Palestinians are understood within Palestine and outside. At the heart of this machinery, I want to speak about two locks that are interrelated. There's, I would call it the double lock, the machine, the factory of unseeing that is based on a double lock. A lock on bodies, and that's imposed through the control of movement, of resources, of protection, and of the material conditions of life. And a lock on meaning, and that's imposed through the control of sense-making, the frames, the categories, the narratives that tell the world about the Palestinian experience and conditions what it's allowed to mean, basically. And the two locks work together. When they work together, they dim what we may think of as essential dials of humanity. They dim dials of protection, of credibility, and of grievability. So I would like to describe basically what happens when these locks are in place, how are they in place, and how do they dim the dials. Showing that when this happens, when these locks dim the dials in practice, Palestinians become unseeable. And I don't mean invisible, I mean really unseeable. And if seen, they become unintelligible. They are either unintelligible or actually a priori disbelievable. One point is crucial here, I think, is that the epistemic order I'm talking about, the being unseeable, being disbelievable, a priori disbelievable, and unintelligible, derives from the material conditions, but at the same time it reinforces and legitimizes the material conditions. And this interaction between the two is really what I would like to pay attention to. So it's really important to understand that there is an epistemic order, a Zionist epistemic order that is in place, and it's so intertwined with the material conditions of the colonizing, the settler colonialism that is in Palestine. The discursive lock and the material lock are really working all the time together. They complement each other. Sometimes it's even hard actually to distinguish one from the other. And to take this from that abstract notion to something more concrete, I have a few examples, but I think I will focus mainly on what I would like to call the carceral mobility, the system, the obstruction of movement, the way movement of Palestinians is controlled. And how that becomes a vehicle of dehumanization. So looking at the military, the Zionist mobility order in Palestine is one of the most concrete ways to see the factories of unseeing at work. How the double lock operates, and how it turns down the protection, credibility, and grievability dials to render the Palestinians unseeable, and if seen, unintelligible and disbelievable. Carceral mobility names the paradox at the heart of the Zionist mobility order, because people are neither free nor imprisoned. They're not really imprisoned in the most typical sense, but they're not really free. They live in the geography of conditional, surveyed, revocable movement. So the right to movement is not actually a right that is taken for granted. It's not only in Palestine, but that's something maybe I want to say. When we look at Palestine, we see it so clearly, but unfortunately, it's not only in Palestine. And unfortunately, it's becoming more and more in places where it wasn't like that. So the double locks, how the Zionist mobility order controls bodies and the meaning. The factory seeing works through material immobilization and isolation, and there are two things. We have immobilization and we have isolation. That's the body's lock. And there is a meanings log that uses sanitized, security-driven discourse, narrative frames in order to describe what is happening. And they work together. We have different geographies throughout Palestine, but so in the West Bank, in Jerusalem, in Gaza, in the whole of historic Palestine. But the logic is the same. At the end, what we get is that the carceral mobility regime fragments in the West Bank, it seals in Gaza, and it alienates of all of Palestine. So just to give an idea, I don't know how many of you have been in Palestine before. I know Ruth has been. But I think anyone that goes to Palestine once understands why we need to speak about mobility and fragmentation. And I'll start by the West Bank. The West Bank, Palestine is all really tiny. The West Bank, where... Slower. Okay, thank you. So the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, is slightly bigger than Algarve. So slightly more than 5,500 square kilometers. In this very tiny space, scattered between settlements and settler roads, so actually that's the total surface of the West Bank, 85% of it goes to settlements and the roads of the settlers, so 85% of it is not actually accessible to Palestinians. But the accessible part, I don't know if you can imagine what that is, has roadblocks, had let's call them military barriers. This is slightly sanitized, but I could not find something less sanitized than that. There are horrible structures that basically stop the Palestinians from leaving their homes in their way to anything, to school, from village to city, to work, to hospitals, to weddings, to parties, to just have a coffee with a friend. And just to have an idea, between fixed checkpoints that are stable there, they never move, which are around 50, to kind of flying checkpoints, roadblocks, gates. Today, the West Bank, almost every village has a metal gate at the entrance, at the exit of it. In total, we have around 850 military barriers that stop the Palestinian from basically like moving, from going from home to work, from going to see a friend. I don't know if you can imagine, how is it if Algarve had 850 barriers that would stop people from moving? And it's not stopping, it's stopping, humiliating. People die at checkpoints. It's almost like if you would take it by average, and of course it's not by average because sometimes it's more concentrated, it's almost like every 4.5 kilometers, you have a checkpoint. Every 5-7 minutes of drive, an Israeli soldier is going to stop you and decide whether you can pass or not, whether you can live or not. People are killed on these checkpoints. East Jerusalem is a completely different story. East Jerusalem is officially part of the West Bank, but it's a completely different story. In East Jerusalem, it's not only the movement that is conditional on bureaucracy, on material restrictions, but actually the Israeli legal system forces a Jerusalemite to either live in Jerusalem or lose the right to enter Jerusalem. At the same time, it has reunification, and I'm describing here the material conditions of the movement controls. If you are a Palestinian from Jerusalem, you have to work and live in Jerusalem. You have to love and get married to someone from Jerusalem, because if not, you just lose the right to go and visit your family in Jerusalem. So if you live, and that's actually interesting because the way it's materialized through legal system, Palestinians from Jerusalem are not considered citizens. They are residents. And as residents, so the natives are residents. And as residents, if they live for more than 3 years, if they do not live, they lose their right of residence. So behind that kind of fragmentation of the West Bank is a complete fully fledged legal system that he studies for its efficiency. A system of permits, of movement control, but also of reunification, family reunification limitations. So if you're a Palestinian, all over Palestine, actually, not just in Jerusalem, the West Bank and Gaza, you cannot marry someone from abroad and bring them to live with you. The unification of families is non-existent. So crucially, what we get here, we get a fragmented, we get basically the right to move denied. A basic right is not considered a basic right, but a gift that is given to you when the colonial power decides you deserve it. At the same time, when you see Israelis justifying that legal system that is well built, the language is very technocratic, very sanitized. Basically, it's population management, it's security filters. So we're not talking. We're talking about a natural order that is in place there. So the right is denied. But the way it's presented, it's the normality, basically, for this type of people. Gaza is a completely different story. And I think most of the people know today more about Gaza because of the horrors we have seen. But you should never remember that Gaza has been besieged already since 2007. So even before the genocide, people were... So if the West Bank is a mesh of military barriers, Gaza is a cage, is a locked cage. It has always been a locked cage. It's a place where, in order to leave for education, for treatment, you have to get, again, the same system of permits. It's a place where it's unthought of to go visit friends outside of Gaza. You cannot go for treatment, so also, so and it's actually very difficult to start talking about the cage of Gaza and focus only on the mobility, but I will try to do that. So let's think of it. Most people in Gaza never left Gaza, not because they didn't want to leave Gaza, but because they cannot leave Gaza. And on top of all of that, so throughout the blockade years, even before, but things became much harder after the blockade. It became, the rule is that you do not go out. The exception is that you are allowed out. Things got to a completely different level when the bombardments start. I don't know in how many other places in the world people were not allowed to flee bombardment areas. So the protection that you get, the movement, the right to movement that is basic, is restricted even under the strongest of conditions. UN organizations and international human rights organizations also refer to a lot. You have a lot of reports on the effect of the mobility restrictions, the immobility, basically, and the numbers are infinite of how many people died from treatable illnesses because people just cannot go. The medication cannot enter. Foreign doctors' entry is very limited, and people cannot leave. So the discursive layer in Gaza is also there to explain, to sanitize, to normalize the dehumanization. What we hear of when we hear about the restrictions to movement, the carceral immobility in Gaza. Is it for me to finish? Okay. So.
But no.
I'll wait.
Go on, please. Sorry, I didn't know.
It was a good reminder. So I'll try to go into less details from now on, and in the second round, I hope I can continue this.
No, but please. Yes, it's fine. Sorry.
No. So when we hear in the news talking about the inhuman deprivation of mobility in Gaza, we hear talking about border control, about the borders being open or not, about buffer zones, about colored line. Now we're talking about the yellow line. We have technical questions of border operations. So it's technicalities always that make it look like a bureaucratic obstacle, basically. So the horror are hidden beyond that. Another important element of the material and sense-making conditions when it comes to movement in Palestine is the way Palestine in general is isolated from the rest of the world through mobility. So for the Palestinians to get out of Palestine, and Gaza, we have already established you do not get out of Gaza, but the West Bank, in order to get out of the West Bank, you have to go through Israeli military border control. Even if you live in the Palestinian, in the areas run by the Palestinian Authority. In the past, you could use the Israeli airport. It's more or less impossible today for Palestinians. But going through the borders with Jordan, you still have to be controlled by Israel. Israel bans, so it can and it does ban people from traveling. The latest, I don't know if you heard about that, the latest news about that came when the Palestinian hostages were released from Israeli prisons. Those who were exiled, those who were sent abroad, their families were all banned from traveling to be with them. So Israel actually exercises the power it has to basically cut or ban the Palestinians from leaving. At the same time, it's not that foreigners can enter Palestine easily. Anybody that tried to enter Palestine that is not Palestinian knows that you have to lie, because if the Israelis at the border know that you're going to Palestine, they will not let you in. So Palestinians cannot leave in principle. Foreigners, those who are pro-Palestine, cannot enter. In the last years also, even those who have jobs with international organizations do not get visas, or their families do not get visas. We all know also foreign journalists were not allowed into Gaza. So what we get here, we get Palestine isolated, materially isolated from the rest of the world. And what this does is also, it makes the Palestinian experience very, very, very far from what the people know. If the Palestinians cannot travel and the rest of the world cannot go to Palestine, and we are already living draconian version of colonial domination. How is it that the Palestinian, even if they try to tell their story, even those that make it to be seen, how is it that they will be intelligible or even credible? So to keep the rest, the rest short, and I will continue later. What we have here, we have an intertwined working of the two locks. The material conditions make it impossible to move and isolate. And the meaning lock, the narratives, the frames, make the experience of the Palestinian unintelligible. So when Palestinians die on the checkpoint, it's not, we have here the dial of protection completely gone, but also the dial of intelligibility, of credibility also at stake. When the Palestinians die at checkpoint, their right is taken, and at the same time, the story that is told doesn't make sense to the rest of the world. I think it's important to think of how the material reality and the discourse complement each other, in order to understand that at the end, like we have a machine, like all colonial machines, they dehumanize, but at the same time, understanding the working, the intertwining between these two is an important step to actually break the machine. So if you're thinking of decolonizing bodies and decolonizing practices, we start there. We start by deconstructing this machine, by understanding how the double locks affect the protection, affect the credibility, affect whether we grieve the Palestinians or not, in order to be able actually to dismantle this machine and install a different one. I would like to talk a lot also about the bodies returned, the dismembered bodies returned by Israel in the last few weeks, as another place where we can look at the factories of unseeing, but I can do that in the second part. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dima. I hope you don't forget, and you have help not to do it, what you want to say, but I also would like to listen something you put, we can share that. She sent me a little abstract. And yes, I would like to listen a little bit more about this gender division, like men are criminalized and women are depolitized to make their opinions not to count, but in a second round, because now we count on Ruthie, if I may, to give us some examples of how to fight colonialism and capitalism. They are all together. So if I may read something I wrote for you. To comfort the inequality, injustice, environmental catastrophe, and sheer human sacrifice the prisons unleash on people, you invoke radical abolition. However, your historical understanding of racial capitalism, changing same, has produced a theory of abolition that goes beyond enabling people to walk free from prisons. Since your argument, state violence is a form of class warfare. The purpose of abolition isn't only to end moral catastrophe of incarceration, but also to create a society in which freedom and abundance are universal relations. As you put it, abolition's goal is to change how we interact with each other and the planet by putting people before profits, welfare before warfare, and life over death. Can you tell us a little bit more about this idea of abolition as a practice?
Hello? Oh. I guess it's working. First of all, thank you, Dima, for a very engaging and moving introduction to our conversation this evening. Thank you, Kitty, and the scientific committee for inviting me to be part of this plenary. I'm really honored to be here in chilly Porto. I live in warm Lisbon, where it's not warm. All right, so let me start with some thoughts. And I set my own timer, so I'll interrupt myself. One of the things I think that we can consider together, using Dima's exposition of carceral mobility as a way in, is to think about emplotment as the narrative ordering of time and the geometric ordering of space. Now, you might say, what does that have to do with anything that we're here to talk about? And the answer is everything. Everything. The facts of organized abandonment and organized violence are facts that exist in the world as central processes that shape and reshape capitalist modernity. Like all of it. All of it. Colonialism and imperialism and slavery are three principal features of capitalist modernity. But if we think through each of those features, we find that organized abandonment and organized violence, as Dima just explained to us, are always present. Those processes result in a general way in land grabbing, in time grabbing, and in life grabbing. In the context of the production, reproduction, and social reproduction of the various realities through which capitalism achieves its own valorization. I know that all sounds somewhat abstract and general, but if you think with me a little more, you will see that it works all the way down to the ground, everywhere I've had an opportunity to think about. Not as a blueprint, but as a model for thinking. We can see the catastrophes from outer space. We know we can see the catastrophe of Gaza from outer space. We can see the reconfiguration of West Bank from outer space. We can see the catastrophe on the ground in Sudan from outer space. We can see the US-Mexico border from outer space. It's all visible. And the fact that we can see these things from outer space does not make them any less material, but it gives us some opportunity to think both metaphorically and materially about how the global system of capitalist modernity not only shrinks and frequently obliterates human and other life on this planet, but also how there are so many possibilities from the ground up for people and their communities and their environments to be protagonists of history, not merely history's victims. The machinery, the carceral machinery, the machinery of unseeing, is the machinery that works, as Dima explained to us, through definition, through differentiation, and again, through the processes of valorization, which also means devalorization. Some of my comrades, most notably Vanessa Thompson and Daniel Loic, who are abolitionists, movement people, intellectuals, and researchers from Germany, have started a project which I'm very excited about called Surplus of the World Unite. And I think that is exactly the call that we must all join. Surplus of the World Unite. Surplus of the World Unite. And thinking back, here I'm going to finally get to abolition. Thinking back across the long historical geography of capitalist modernity, and I don't mean contemporaneity, I mean 500 plus years, we might be able to situate abolition where I and many others think it actually arose. And that is in the first moments of captivity. That abolition is not a 19th century movement put forward by good liberals like Wilberforce or whomever, but rather, as the historian Manisha Sinha says, abolition was always the slave's cause, which means then that abolition arose in the context of, in the moment of captivity. And therefore, we have something on the order of a double consciousness in which people who are victims are also, perhaps always, certainly often, protagonists as well. That means then that abolition is not about changing status. It's not about getting a piece of paper that says you're no longer a prisoner, you're no longer under colonial rule, you're no longer this, you're no longer that, but rather it is about making freedom through making place, which is to say it's an ongoing, constantly unfolding set of relations, as I think Kitty was indicating a little bit earlier. And, to quote myself back to you, placemaking is how we combine our energy with one another and the earth in order to change the external world and thereby change our own nature. And every true Marxist in this room recognizes what I just said. Thank you. And those who don't, all right. So abolition brings together the strongest elements and practices of anarchism and communism, both. Indeed, ooh. Oh, no, I'm good. What abolition is, for me these days, is emancipation in rehearsal. Abolition is emancipation in rehearsal. It's not rehearsing emancipation, it's emancipation in rehearsal. Rehearsal that never ends. Never ends. One way to think about it is how we struggle to make today better in order to make tomorrow better. I mentioned double consciousness earlier, and certainly W.E.B. Du Bois's thinking is haunting our convening this afternoon. And double consciousness urgently helps us think about how we can at once be aware of how, let's be blunt, how the enemy sees us and how we see ourselves. So rehearsal is practice, experiment, effort. And in Spanish and Portuguese, ensayo is actually better than rehearsal in English, because ensayo carries all of that meaning in it, and I love that. I love that. It gives us the opportunity to think about how practice makes different. Something every artist and every athlete knows. Practice does not make perfect. Practice makes different. And it's making different that enables us to make freedom by making place. In short, what abolition requires is that we change one thing, which is everything. Thank you.
You still have 3 minutes.
All right, then, quickly I will give some experiments. Examples, essays, rehearsal. Let's start in the United States, because that's where I cut my abolition teeth. And in in the United States, the contemporary abolition movement, which grew up around anti-prison activism, arose because people who were involved in all different kinds of social justice organizing from a radical Marxist and feminist perspective noticed that no matter what we were doing, we ran into criminalization and incarceration as an impediment to us realizing whatever it is we tried to realize, whether it was housing, healthcare, adequate food, adequate transportation, access to education, you name it, dignified old age. Constantly, criminalization, as Dima just explained to us, is a central feature of the control of every aspect of social life on this planet. And when the forces of organized abandonment have wreaked the crises that throw people's lives into constant motion, the forces of organized violence are arrayed nearby to herd and shape that motion into particular directions and away from others. And the force through which that can be realized is either criminalization or military action. And the difference between the two is barely discernible, barely discernible. So that is an example, and I will tell you that in California, we managed to reduce the number of people in prison dramatically by building relations on the ground throughout that vast state, a state of 35 million people, in which abolition geography arose as the antagonistic contradiction of carceral geography, right? And this we can also see in some cases much more perhaps smaller, but still as vibrant in Palestine, where, as my comrade Basil Faraj, who teaches at Be'er Zeit, tells us, Palestinian prisoners who have become abolitionists inside figured out ways to do the kind of placemaking, even under conditions of complete carceral control, that enable a certain kind of freedom, which is not capital L liberal freedom, oh, they're freed in their minds, but rather a freedom that then, a freedom that then expands and extends throughout the struggle that is the Palestinian cause for freedom. We can talk in the next round about South Africa. We can talk about Brazil. We can talk about big social movement organizations and smaller social movement organizations. There are many, many examples we can discuss. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think I don't have to say nothing to this second round because you already both made the proposals of how you would like to go on. So please, go on. I'm delighted to listen to you. Dima, the floor is yours.
I want to ask if anybody wants to...
Yes, but in the last half an hour.
Okay.
I will give you half an hour to put the questions you cannot cut in your throat. Okay.
Yes. So there are so many things that I said I would love to come back to in the second round, and one of them is the one you asked, the gendered. The script of a script that we see a lot when so maybe before speaking about the script is the dangerous men and imperiled women that most of the narrative about Palestine adopts. But before that, I think I want to make clear that when I speak about the factors of seeing the pipelines of dehumanization, the Zionist pipeline of dehumanization, it's not only in Israel. And I think that's very, very important. It's a structure that is all over the world. And I think in that sense, we are all part of it, and we are all part of the resistance of it. Not in the same way, especially if you think of the body lock. The body lock is much clearer in Palestine, but it's not only in Palestine. But the meaning lock, particularly, is a co-construction of all the Zionists all over the world. And I call them all Zionists because I think it's Zionism basically controlling the narrative, especially when we think of that pattern, that trope of dangerous men, imperiled women. There's nothing more dehumanizing to the Palestinians, men and women, than putting them like that. And it falls very well into the typical colonial machine of contrasting the savages with the civilized, that has gender built into it. And in Palestine, again, the double lock works very well. You have different rules for men than you have for women in Palestine. So if you think how male bodies and female bodies are treated, they are not. So the script is, as I tried to say in the first round, the two locks are so one enforcing the other in such a way. Of course, it all starts with the material conditions, with the body lock, but without a strong meaning lock, the body lock cannot be sustained, and we cannot understand that the world actually accepts to see or not to see what is happening in Palestine. We cannot understand how we have some feminists that are outraged when women's rights are not respected, and they look at Palestine and they don't see that the colonial domination, the Zionist colonial domination, is the biggest violation of any woman's, any human's right, basically. So I could explain some of the things so as I said again, I think it's important for me, one of the points I want to emphasize most is that we need to see how the system tells the story to itself and to the rest of the world. And Israel is, again, an excellent example of how you can construct a narrative that is completely detached from reality, but completely embedded in the ideology of domination, in the settler colonial project that actually has the objective of substituting, of erasing a whole people. So when you think of mobility, for example, men and women do not have the same restrictions. Normally, women over 50 can travel easier. They can get permits easier than men. At the same time, a woman engaging in political action is punished a lot more than a man, because this is not the space for women to do. So it's reinforcing gender discrimination, sometimes even imposing, not reintroducing it, not reinforcing it, but actually imposing it, forcing the society to go into different roles, forcing society to assign different roles, even within the liberation movement, to assign different roles for men and women. I think it's important to understand the role of the institutions of sense-making outside of Palestine also in making that. How the media covers, and to talk about the media, it's a whole day to speak about how the media covers men and women differently, reproducing the colonial script, basically. But not just media, universities, NGOs, all institutions that actually help us shape the narrative, tell the story of the Palestinians. Remember when I spoke about the bodies lock, I spoke about the impossibility of Palestinians to travel, or the difficulty of Palestinians to travel, and of the world to go there. That translates into what we could call an epistemic blockade, because the Palestinian experience becomes almost an alien experience. There's almost a hermeneutical gap, because what happens in Palestine is not something that is understandable outside of Palestine, because of the control on the bodies that is reinforced by control, the algorithms, for example, in social media. So we have to think of an architecture, an infrastructure architecture, that also has, it's a sense-making architecture, but is also very limited by the body's lock. So it all starts with the restrictions on the bodies that deny the basic rights, and in that sense it dims the protection dial. So the dehumanization happens, I was trying to say in the first round, through dimming 3 different dials. The dial of protection, so who is considered worthy of protection? It's a political, legal right, you can say, a legal standing. And it's clearly the case that the Palestinians Israel keeps creating new categories to make sure that not only it kills Palestinians without accountability, that's the physical power, but also when the story is told, it doesn't look like these people were supposed to be protected, because they were terrorists. So they did not. Israel kills women and men and children on checkpoints. And the narrative is always that they try to attack the soldiers. So you deny the protection by imposing by force, and then you tell the story in such a way to make it look like that's a natural thing. So that's how the protection dial is dimmed, and it's the first step in the dehumanization. It doesn't stop there, because after the protection, you have the credibility. When the Palestinian tells the story, so the Palestinian you try as much as possible to prevent the Palestinian from telling the story. But when the Palestinian tells the story, they're not credible. They are not credible for different reasons, and it's all part of the structure that is built. It's because their experience is unknown, it's alien, it belongs to a different world. It's indeed, after living 20 years out of Palestine, I understood that there's nothing I can tell to tell people what it is exactly to be in Palestine. And every time I had a friend go with me to Palestine, every time they told me, you did not prepare us for that. And I never stopped speaking about Palestine. So there's nothing that I can say that can prepare people. And it's exactly because the narrative, there is this gap that the language is not ready. The language is not allowed to be ready to tell the Palestinian experience. And there is the body lock that actually you feel only when you are there. So the movement lock, the movement that prevents the non-Palestinians to go to Palestine is not a coincidence. It's exactly to create the conditions for the credibility dial to be dimmed, because there's no way. I mean, people tell you things and you cannot make sense of them, and that's it. You have also the forced, the kind of institutional effort that is done. Nothing like best to describe that, like the BBC and other international agencies, every time they report numbers from people killed in Gaza, they say the Hamas-run Ministry of Health. What is the Hamas-run Ministry of Health? It's exactly that label that is put to make it, in principle, it's in principle disbelievable. So you have to go through, and I'd like to think indeed of abolition as the way to go against all of that. The abolition in the way you, Ruthie, were describing it. The way to be aware of how the double locks work, the way the dehumanization follows from these locks, follows from the intertwining of the material conditions of oppression, of denying the rights, and the meaning lock that actually conditions what meanings we can make, what meanings we have access to, and we can reproduce. So, as abolition as the way to destroy the factories of unseeing.
Okay, I never. Thank you. I am sorry. We are maybe this half an hour is becoming a little bit shorter, but I think that we all agree that it's more important to listen to Dima. I cannot, yes, but now, but you speak more. But I cannot say, she asked me to tell her when she's talking too much, but she's never talking too much. Exactly. So, sorry, but this is how I feel. This is my moderation. Dima, Ruthie, I'm sorry to insist in this gender thing.
Okay.
But we are in a Marxist Feminist Conference, right? Knowing the case of Portugal, and I know you know it also, I feel like the abolition movement, there is a start. We are almost starting an abolition movement, and this is led by women. The mothers of those who die in prison and who are incarcerated, the sisters, the wives, and I wanted to ask you if you have, what do you think about this? If you have other examples, what is the role of women in this abolition movement where you work, and as a woman, of course?
Okay. Thank you. That's a very good question. And I will answer with a general observation. You'd never know to listen to some people, but not us. We are exempt from this. You'd never know that most of the Marxists in the world are not white, they're not men, and they're not in the global north. That's just the point about Marxism. And looking across this room, we see. All right. I talked very, very briefly about the contemporary abolition movement that I was part of building in California over the last 30 years. And almost all of the principal actors in that movement are either women, gender nonconforming, et cetera, right? It's a fact of social movement life, a fact of social movement life. And certainly when it comes to the struggle against criminalization in prisons in the way that you just described, Kitty, here in Portugal and elsewhere, the fact is that those who have the energy and determination to put in a triple day, a day of working for their households, a day of doing social reproduction for their households, and a day of doing justice work for their households, very often tend to be women or caregivers who have assumed those gender roles, whatever kind of genitalia and gametes they have, right? So one thing that I noticed over many years that resonates with your question, Kitty, is how frequently the people on the front line of struggle are, for example, older women who, because we can pass through barriers that younger people and men of any age cannot pass through. People who can use a certain asserted moral authority. It's not necessarily agreed to, but asserted, like the mothers of the Plaza de Mayo in Argentina, who will stand out in the open with scarves on their head, with diapers on their heads as scarves, day in and day out, in protest against their disappeared, or the mothers of those who have died in custody here in Portugal, or the many women in Palestine and in the Palestinian diaspora who lead so much. These facts give us some way of thinking with our comrades, for example, in the Wages for Housework campaign, or with those who are theorists of social reproduction, like Kitty Furtado, who I think was part of this conference last time, to think about how, well, I'll just use Titi's words. Social reproduction gives us a diagnostic for which perhaps abolition gives us the political vision, right? That the political vision has to do with struggling in order to remedy the problems of organized abandonment in so many places, plus the struggle to face up to the forces of organized violence, including military violence in Palestine, the violence against loved ones, including bringing about their premature death here in Portugal and beyond. At the same time, what many of my sister comrades have learned and have built from their learning is that the forces of organized violence, are not just like a steady state that is not changed over 500 years, but rather the forces of organized violence build their political capacity and indeed frequently become the political class while still wielding the weapons. This is true in Israel, it is true in, with Chega here in Portugal, it is true in Washington, D.C., it is true many places. The constant, what's the word I'm looking for? The constant insistence on the part of the right, wherever they are, the fascist right, wherever they are, that there are fixed definitions and roles of two and only two genders. There are only men and only women, and it is known in advance what it is to be a man and to be a woman, gives us some insight into the vulnerability of fascism to reproduce itself, because it has to insist on a blueprint for social reality, whereas we know, our side, which I think is probably 4,000,000,001 people on the planet, we know that there is no blueprint, there are only models. And the models are flexible, and the models build and sometimes stretch and accomplish more and more and more. This doesn't exactly answer fully the question of what about gender, but it does give us some way of thinking together about how the centrality of gender is part of how we can think through the reality of the present and also think critically, if not decisively, about such things as the rise of evangelism, about such things as I mentioned earlier, the rise of fascism, and also about the various ways that we can build our power together by insisting that production, reproduction, and social reproduction are part of a continuum rather than ways of dividing or confusing already existing classes and social interest groups. I will pause there.
And now, finally, I give you the word for comments, questions, and basically that, comments and questions. Yes? There?
Can you hear me? Okay, thank you so much for this interesting discussion for all of you. I wanted to share a personal experience to continue on what Dima said. First of all, my name is Hind Abu Shkhedem. I am a Palestinian and I am one of the speakers who will give a workshop tomorrow. And I wanted to share something related the right of movement or the barrier of movement in Palestine. So I'm a film producer, and recently we released a film documentary about Palestine, and this documentary was basically premiered and screened all over the world. And as a producer, I was able to go many places, either me or the director. Last week, we decided to make the premiere in Palestine, in Bethlehem, the city where the documentary was produced, and to celebrate the main character, who was like the person who we're talking during this film. He's an old man, a Palestinian old man, and we wanted to give him a trophy and present the film and bring his family and just celebrate this. So what happened is that the director, who lives in Hebron, was going in her way to Bethlehem, where the screening was supposed to happen. And it's, just for you to imagine, it's 28 kilometers far. What happened while she was trying to go out of Hebron, out of a sudden, the Israeli army decided to close all the checkpoints, the barriers, and we didn't know what happened. We were very sad to know that she, the film producer, who was able to travel and to present her film everywhere, was not able to present it in her country. But later, we knew that the two Israeli soldiers decided to kill 2 Palestinian children. They are 19, so basically teenager, let's say. First-year freshman, first-year nursing school, because they thought that they will do something dangerous. So they basically killed those 2 people and decided to close the city. And it was the same road that the director is supposed to take. So at a certain point, I felt relieved. I was like, okay, I'm so glad that the director didn't go, because she might be that person who would face this faith. And like literally 1 minute later, I felt so disgusted about myself because I was relieved that 2 people were dead, and I am happy that somebody I know was not dead. And that just one example how this systematic oppression, how this continuous oppression does not only control the movement, but also control how we see each other, how we respect ourselves, and how it makes a constraint in our brain what we can do and what we cannot do. So what I think as a Palestinian also have to do is to struggle every day to remind myself that I am a human and that I need to go out so many obstacles that normal people would not even think about. I just wanted to share this personal story because while Dima was talking, it really crossed my mind how very specific, but this is happening in so many bigger scales. Like what I'm talking about is nothing comparing to what other Palestinians would face. So thank you so much.
Aqui.
Hi, thank you all so much, and thank you also to this intervention. It's always beautiful and a pleasure to hear you two talk. I have a question for Ruthie. You mentioned these, I think you said it was Titi Bhattacharya said something along the lines of social reproduction gives us a diagnosis and abolition gives us a political response. Vision, exactly. I was just wondering if you would like to develop that thought a little, because I guess what I'm thinking is that if abolition is, as it is, a form of presence, as you say, then I guess a kind of reorganization or rethinking of social reproduction beyond the household and into wider geographies as well could be part of that political vision, or should be involved in an abolitionist project, but I wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
Sure. We can maybe have 2 questions, okay. Or there is another one.
Hi, thank you very much for your talks. I'm Lola from Berlin, and here. In my circles, like queer, trans Marxist discussions, there's a lot of controversial discussion about family abolition, and I would love to hear your thoughts on the relation between, because, for example, you mentioned the Cinco de Mayo protest, and I think there's a contradiction there, and I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Another one?
Hi, thank you all. It was very thought-provoking. I have a little question for Dima. You talked about dehumanization, and I thought you were bringing 3 points of denial, like protection, credibility, and I did not get the third one. Maybe you can elaborate on that shortly. Thank you.
Grievability, the capacity to, but I'll speak about it.
Okay. Okay, but do it.
No, I think Lucy could start.
Yes?
Yeah.
Because I speak too much anyway.
Okay. All right. So many good questions, and thank you for sharing observations and your puzzles, our puzzles. Social reproduction theory beyond the household. I think that has got to be the given rather than what we develop. And I think that people like Titi have been working on that for a long time, Cindy Katz, Sue Ferguson, so on and so forth. That is to say, if we take seriously this call, surplus of the world unite, that means that all aspects of how we make our lives together matters. It matters both for our collective well-being and for our capacity to interrupt the machinery of capitalism. Like this is all one thing. The Wages for Housework campaign worked that out, as have other people as well. So, I mean, the Wages campaign was, from the beginning, thinking about where value comes from. Now, we can debate about value until the cows come home. But the fact is that for anybody to go and sell their labor power in the capitalist market, that labor power has to be produced and reproduced somehow. How does that happen? Like, where does that commodity come from? This is like a really basic thing. And then we can sort of extend from that into thinking about the various ways that we combine our energy with one another and the earth in order to make our lives, gives us some little and sometimes greater than little insight into how to interrupt the capitalist machine, which is to say, interrupt value as property, right? Which is to say, interrupt property. So I will give an example quickly. Comrades in South Africa, as is true of comrades all around the world, where there is vast housing shortage. Everybody knows this. For the first time in human history, more than half of us live in urban areas. Never happened before in all of human history. It is true now. And in urban areas, in the north as well as in the south, there is not adequate housing for everybody who needs shelter. So, comrades in South Africa who are part of a wing of the shack dwellers movement called Abashali have worked very hard with people who have built and defended settlements in order to have a place to live and make themselves happy, really.
Live, in a true sense.
Yes, live. Abashali has one rule. You can never sell or rent your house that is part of the Abashali community. i.e., people who did land occupation in order to build their own houses, in order to create settlements, in order to become part of the movement, and that's the order of things. You don't become part of the movement until all those other things have happened. In order to remain part of the movement, must agree that that little bit, 80 by 90 feet, I translate that to kilometers, will never be available for capitalist value production. This is an amazing thing, and we can see it in many, many other ways as well. And I guess I just want to say one thing to my comrade about abolish the family. That's fantastic. Abolishing all of the rigid structures of social organization means changing them into something else, right? This is no scorched earth, salt the ground plan. That's not what abolition is. That's salting the earth. The question, however, that constantly faces us is this: what weapons do we have? Most of us on this planet who are fighting to realize emancipation, which is to say to realize abolition, even if that's not the word people use, are not going to be able successfully to use armaments. We don't have them, and if we have them, we don't have enough, right? So there are other weapons. The mothers of the Plaza de Mayo used a weapon. Now, any number of the women in that movement could have had, for us, horrible ideas about gender and sexuality and so on and so forth. That's not my point. My point is they figured out a weapon and they used it. Law is a weapon that we can use, it's a weapon they use. Rights, a word that Dima used many, many times this evening. Well, you know, what's the substance of rights? What makes the appeal for rights into a weapon for our defense and advancement? These are questions that we constantly have to return to without falling into the liberal trap of thinking, oh, that means that the legal system as it is as it should be, that rights as partially understood are what they should be, and so forth. Okay.
So I'll be really brief, or I try at least. The third dial is the grievability. So while the protection is a legal, political nature standing, the credibility is epistemic. The grievability is about recognizability. So whose suffering is recognizable as in the public sphere. Here, I think I want to just very briefly refer to, because I kept saying it's not only in Palestine, and I really want to make sure what I described is not happening only in Palestine. And I would like to mention only, at least, the case of Kani, the 36-year-old pregnant woman that died, she and her daughter, in the Amadora Sintra hospital. The way she was dealt with, the way she was treated materially, the way her story was told, has all the dials, the grievability particularly, because instead of grieving the loss, the minister went to parliament, the minister of health went to parliament, talking about nonsense, basically, about maybe she didn't speak Portuguese, maybe she did not have a mobile phone, maybe she did not know how to ask for help. So we have that kind of dimming the dial of grievability in dehumanization, and it's happening more and more. All the things I've talked about mobility, particularly in Palestine, we see them in all the revisions we are seeing proposed to asylum-seeking laws, to immigration laws, all over the world. So I would love to speak a lot more, especially about the case of Kani, but I will just really conclude by telling Hind, I'm really thankful that you shared your experience, because I think when I was speaking, I was not clear enough to say that the meaning lock applies to us Palestinians first. So you're completely right. The way we make sense of what's happening to us, the dehumanization, it's a lot of effort to actually break the lock. I still remember when I was living in Palestine and going to university, through the checkpoint, every day I had to walk 1.5 kilometers through a dirt road that was destroyed by the Israelis. So it used to be a normal road. The trip from my home to university would take 10 minutes by car. The trip started taking an hour because you could take 5 minutes by car. Then you had to walk downhill, uphill, with soldiers that would throw tear gas on you. So sometimes you arrived after 2 hours, sometimes you never arrived. And when we only walked and we were not attacked by soldiers, my fellow students would say, oh, it was easy today. And I was always, how on earth do we make it look like easy when we had to go through all that? But it's a very delicate balance, facing the dehumanization we go through and refusing it. So it happens often that instead of breaking the meaning dial, we adopt it in a soft way in order to survive, basically.